Welcome to the Painting of the Week podcast, where we look at some of the most significant paintings throughout history. Introducing your hosts, Phil Grabsky and Laura Bentham.
Welcome to this week's Painting of the Week. And it's another one of those specials where I'm not, sadly, with Laura. I'm actually in the United States, on the West Coast, just off Seattle. And today we're going to talk about an interesting artwork, a Thangka. Now, if you go to seventh-art.com and press on the podcast button, you'll see the artwork, which is extremely beautiful. Or if you go to our YouTube channel, you can also listen and watch at the same time to watch the painting or look at the painting at the same time as we're talking. Who is we? Well, I'm delighted that I'm doing this podcast with none other than my own brother, Marc. Now, Marc is a remarkable human being. He is a traveller and he is also an importer to the United States, or to the west coast of the United States at least, of very fine carpets and jewellery and artworks. And this particular artwork was a gift to me last Christmas. And I looked at it and I thought, that's very beautiful. I'll get that framed. I'll find somewhere in the house to put it up. But then subsequently I thought to myself, I haven't really looked at it. I don't actually understand it. The geometric patterns are interesting and the colours are arresting, but it's time to try to understand this a little bit more. So, Marc, welcome to...
Thank you. It's a pleasure on this rather rainy day here on Vashon Island.
Yes, I have to say, in case you can hear the rain, we are seated near a road and it's raining very heavily, so you might hear traffic and you'll certainly hear the rain. But we're going to talk about this painting. Now, this painting will no doubt take you back to being in the heat of India. Let me start by asking where you got it from.
This painting was bought in Kathmandu, Nepal.
Oh, it's from Nepal.
Yes, and I should quickly say that these types of paintings are not really that well known in India or seen. Only in northern India, only influenced by the Buddhist. It's very much of a Buddhist icon. Yeah, okay. And you will see them all over Nepal and Tibet and other Himalayan countries, North India, Dharamsala, but not so much in India, no.
Okay. Now, you mentioned Dharamsala, so let's just throw in a bit of biography here. As a, 18-year-old, finished my senior exams, my A-levels. Brother Marc was travelling through India back then, maybe even living in India at the point. No, actually, you were travelling. And I went out to visit. And I turned up in Delhi airport and Marc said, okay, tomorrow we're going to go to the one place I want you to see in what is the most extraordinary country. We're going to go to the Himalayan foothills and we're going to go to McLeod Ganj, Dharamsala, where the Tibetans in exile live. And I actually didn't know what that meant. Long story short, visiting the Tibetans in Dharamsala changed me from my long-held desire to be a photographer. I'd wanted to be a photographer since I was in my early teens, to wanting to become a filmmaker. And indeed, my first film was about the Dalai Lama of Tibet. Made it while I was at college, sold it to television, became an independent producer, and off I went. So, and when I went back to film that, and Marc came with me, we went to Kathmandu, must have been 1984. So these things have some meaning for me. Now, let's go back to the painting. Now, I asked a colleague, because I have to admit, I really don't know a great deal about it. I'm not going to pretend that I do. So I asked a very smart colleague who works at Seventh Art, whose name is Alice, to do a little bit of research into what can we say about this painting? So she's done some of the work for Marc and I, or Marc might know some of this, and some of the work for you perhaps. So let me just give you a bit of the information to be cracking on with. It's the Wheel of Life that you're looking at. The Kala Chakra mandala, original Tibetan Thangka. It's a sacred meditation art. What is the meaning? The concept of the Wheel of Time is a metaphor to describe the process of transformation from ordinary and material existence to complete enlightenment. I'm sure you all know that is the objective of one of the objectives of Buddhism. It visually represents the important teaching of traditional Tibetan Buddhism, who believe that we are all potential Buddhas because we are essentially pure and luminous at the most basic level of existence. Now look closely at this artwork. It embodies the projection of a palace which includes 5 main distinct levels. I'm going to start actually by saying we are essentially looking down on a pyramid, and which I think helps. If you think, one of the films that I've made, which I do recommend you watch, you can get it at the 7th-art.com website, is called The Lost Temple of Java, the Temple of Borobudur, the most extraordinary Buddhist temple, which disappeared for centuries, was rediscovered by Raffles. And if I was threw my drone up and was getting a shot straight down, this is basically what I would be looking at. Now, the outer Kala Chakra refers to the time and the universe, and the inner Kala Chakra refers to the physical and mental aspects. It represents the time we have in this world to make peace with ourselves, helping to restore balance physically and mentally. Kala is the concept of time, Chakra, concept of the cycles. Okay, now there's a bit more to say, but let me go back to Marc. Now, Marc, when you were travelling in northern India and in Nepal specifically, maybe even in Kashmir, would it apply to Kashmir? I mean, is this art that you see around you, is this day-to-day art? Is it sacred art? Is it hidden away in temples? Will people have this on their walls? How is it used? Where did you see it?
These particular paintings, these Thangkas, do have a purpose. They are used for meditation.
Uh-huh.
So, in the Himalayan regions and cultures, traditionally, they would meditate on this particular painting. And you can imagine, given its 3D sort of aspect, that if you looked at it and went into that no mind, something else would happen in your brain, and you would see a pyramid, I would assume, or something. You would see a lot of things that we can't see on this two-dimensional.
So it's on a wall.
Yeah.
Presumably quite low down then, because people are seated.
Yes.
And they are staring at the painting and using it as a meditative tool.
That is one aspect. You'll also find them around, but I think the most well-known use for this particular image, and many of the listeners would have seen the famous sand mandalas that the Tibetan Buddhists will put together over time with colored sand. Yeah. So you imagine that image. Quite often it might be 5 by 5 feet, 25 square feet, something like that, where 5, 6 monks would be sitting around it, each one picking up a grain of sand that's colored in a certain way and putting it into the picture. And when they're done, then they sweep it all away. So it might take them days, weeks, sometimes months, depending, to create it, and then immediately they sweep it away. They don't photograph it, anything. So that is also the meditation.
But those sand mandalas, paintings, that they are like this with the circles and the pyramid.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, you would see something just like this image, made of sand. in more than one region, and certainly at least once a year, something like this in almost every temple.
So I guess the point is not to have attachments.
Exactly.
Because in my in my house, I'm so attached to stuff. I've got so many things I feel nostalgic towards, whether it's, my child's first teddy bear or some medal that I've got from running, or there's so much stuff. Let me go back to some of the notes that Alice has written for us. The outer ring is called the wisdom circle or protective ring, with golden flames representing the 5 aspects of primordial wisdom and the 5 Dhyani Buddhas, celestial Buddhas who have always existed. Now let me just check. Does my picture have these? Yeah, I guess there are on the golden flames around the outside. Okay, yeah. After the ring, the 4 inner rings represent the 4 elements of, reach for your Spotify people, earth, air, wind and fire. Earth, air, wind and fire. The central part has 3 inner layers, the mandala's body, speech and mind. The most inner part, known as the mind mandala, has a lotus flower within it, symbolizing the Buddha mind, and the residence of a deity or god is represented in a mandala. The Kalachakra mandala is a 2-dimensional representation of a real pyramid-shaped building. As Marc was just saying, Buddhists meditate on the mandala and recite the Kalachakra mantra to bring peace of mind and benefits to all sentient beings. So you can immediately see that art here is being used in a pretty different way to the Western tradition of painting of a noble or painting of a scene from, well, I suppose a religious painting by Caravaggio or Michelangelo might be offered up for some form of meditation, I suppose. The mandala. Hindus and Tantric Buddhists use the mandala when performing sacred rites and meditation. With training, the mandala can be entered into and used to achieve enlightenment. It is said the mandala represents the universe, a geometric symbol used in spiritual, emotional or psychological work to focus one's attention, and we all need that. The mandala has been seen in various cultures, from Hinduism and Buddhism in India, China and Japan, to appearing on covers of the Torah and the Quran, and is often seen in depictions of Christian saints. Now, Marc, we of course are often focused on Western artists, and we see the history of art through looking at the biographies of a Michelangelo, of a Raphael, of a Bosch, of a Vermeer. You've travelled a lot in India and Nepal. Do people talk about specific named artists? Or is one of the things that strikes you when you travel in countries like that is that there's so much art? I mean, India probably is the country where you're going to engage with art on a day-to-day basis more than any other culture that I can think of. But it's probably nameless artists. These are probably artists that didn't leave their name on the sculptures or the artworks. And there probably isn't a famous 16th century Indian. Well, there might be one or two. I guess, the architect of the Taj Mahal as one example. But what's your impression?
Well, art is in the temples in India. It's rare to see artwork on walls as such as we might be associated in the Western cultures. But within the many, many and varied temples, the artwork is carved on the walls or embedded with glass and gems, as the Taj Mahal most famously is. So you're right in many ways. The country is full of the most incredible art, which has clearly been done by very skilled artisans who did not leave their name associated with it. These carvings, if haven't been seen, are rather unbelievable.
Yeah.
And have withstood the test of time and remain very lifelike, especially because many of the carvings are depicting human life, human evolution, human stages of consciousness. And we know clearly that there was a school of artists and artisans and sculptors that were most likely in a class with Michelangelo or whoever else. And their particular role in society was spending their lives carving statues and passing on the skill to their sons.
So what is the temple, is it
Khajuraho?
Khajuraho, where you filmed? A bit like Borobudur, it is just level after level, obviously four-sided pyramid, of the most remarkable sculptures of human forms. I mean, there must have been an entire community of artists, maybe under the senior craftspeople, but there must have been a whole community there just carving away to create these sculptures. And then maybe once they'd finished the temple, which must have taken a lifetime, I guess, maybe would have moved on to another site. And that must have been replicated throughout India, I guess. It must have been the most remarkable tradition, don't you think?
Yes, it is outstanding to gaze upon these temples. And there is a similarity if you were to take your drone above these temples in Khajuraho, and there was at one time 84 of them. It would be similar to this mandala that we're looking at, whereas all of life is represented in these carvings, hundreds upon hundreds of carvings. And what's also remarkable is they seem to have been carved by one hand. They're so precise. It's hard to imagine that so many different people could have created them to look so lifelike and so similar. So it's the same concept, though. If you're looking from above, it comes down as a pyramid. At the top is the perfection of enlightenment human life. And at the bottom, you'll see carvings of worldly existence. Khajuraho, known for the erotic carvings, emphasizes that more than probably any other temple complex that I know.
But also, if you go to India today, for example, you're driving down the road, you are not likely to see, as you do in England, grey trucks, black trucks, white trucks. I mean, they are painted so brightly. I mean, you see this in Pakistan as well. But I mean, again, it's like, we don't want to live in a society which is all grey and black. We want to surround ourselves with colour. I mean, that's the remarkable thing about India. It's an assault of the senses, not least through colour, through art. And that must go back centuries and centuries, I'm sure. You look at some of those temples. I mean, obviously Taj Mahal is a great example, but the Red Fort, or I mean, there's, the Pink Palace of Jaipur, is it?
Yes,
I mean,
the Red City.
These are extraordinary.
They are extraordinary, but they were once more extraordinary because at one time they were painted inside and out. And that is mostly, in most cases, long gone, except, of course, places like the Taj Mahal. So we don't even know what would have been the frescoes within these complexes. It would have been extensive, and I think it, in many cases, would have compared to some of the great artists of the Western culture. But this art is going back thousands of years, in some cases, as opposed to hundreds of years when we think of Europe. So they had incredible artists many, many years before Europe even thought about mixing paints on a canvas. And of course,
which is what makes the oppression, and I wonder whether we can even use the term genocide in Tibet by the Chinese, so appalling. And there's no two ways about it. That, I'm not saying that life under the 14th Dalai Lama in Tibet was ideal, but what's happened in the last 50, 60 years is appalling. You just have to read the history, and the temples that have been destroyed I mean, the human life lost is one thing, it's bad enough, but there's also been a loss of art, which again, when you go to Kathmandu and you buy these kind of artworks, to some extent you are helping an artistic tradition survive.
Very much so. This particular piece that you're talking about was painted by a student Lama in Kathmandu. Most certainly, this young student Lama would have escaped from Tibet at some point this century and would have taken a place in the monastery as a student of art. So, yes.
In Nepal?
In Nepal, in Kathmandu,
okay, I didn't know
along with many others over time.
Okay.
If they have a skill, then it would be seen and utilized. And all of this art that we're seeing in Kathmandu is coming from Tibet. But when you mention the art in Tibet, and I've been to Tibet, it is overwhelming what we may have lost with the destruction of all these temples, because over thousands of years, the Patala, where the Dalai Lama resided, etc., and all these monasteries would have been painted. It's spectacle, as you say, like the trucks in India. It would have been something hard for the eye to behold, really, and take in. Just the detail everywhere. So we did lose a great amount. Enough was left to give us an idea. Some frescoes here and there, faded, many of them partially destroyed. But you do get the sense that thousands of years, and over the last hundreds of years, great and skilled artists were at work in this Himalayan kingdom.
Well, when the Chinese came in, they smashed up so much, and they used it for pavements. I used to say to people, imagine St. Paul's. I mean, I guess Henry VIII did some of this with the but imagine St. Paul's being, we're invaded, we're occupied. St. Paul's Cathedral, Westminster Cathedral, whatever, is destroyed, and those beautiful, all the artworks inside there are just used as pavements for people to walk on, horses to walk on and defecate on.
It's a tragedy, and it's a theft from every single person that lives and every person that is to come. Well, it is. It's a true theft, because that was a pinnacle of this type of art, and it can't ever be reproduced. The example may be best to replace what you just said is the example that Paris was earmarked to be blown to smithereens. There was, at the end of the Second World War, there was dynamite all through tunnels, and Hitler gave the command, blow it to smithereens. And the person that was in command said no. And that's why we still have Paris. So it's true, we may well have lost. We know we've lost so much art, but we may well have lost a lot more.
So this one artwork, which I'm about to find somewhere in my house to put on the wall, it's more than just, pretty patterns and an interesting design and arresting colour. There's a whole history there. There's a meaning. There's perhaps a meditative ally, if I ever needed it. So thank you again for that present.
I'd like to add one other thing.
You go right ahead.
It is a meditative tool. But for people in the West who might not be so inclined to sit in front and meditate, it does actually function as an eye exercise. So people in the West use very similar things to strengthen those thousands of little muscles in the eye, looking at it. So it has a calming and clear and concise purpose in many ways.
Well, as I was saying in the course of this short podcast, please do have a look at the Lost Temple of Java. for kind of an additional insight into Buddhist art, Buddhist way of thinking, and it's an extraordinary story. Who built this temple? Why was it built? Why was it abandoned? Who was Raffles? Why did he find it? So on and so forth. Thank you again for listening. If you do enjoy these podcasts, please do tell your friends or post a 5-star review. These things all help. But above all, do continue to take a close look at the art around you, and we'll be back soon with another Painting of the Week. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Painting of the Week podcast. For more information, please visit our website at seventh-art.com or contact us by emailing info@seventh-art.com. See you next time.